bestseller back in the spring of 2015, just as Hillary Clinton was getting ready to launch her presidential campaign. It drove up her unfavorability ratings, and it raised all sorts of pernicious questions about who Clinton and the Clinton Foundation had financial relationships with, and whether or not this was going to be a problem in her presidential campaign. It was clear, I think, from the scope and tenor of the coverage that there was really something there. And that is the other way, I think, in which Bannon has been able to hack mainstream media news coverage, because these Clinton cash stories and the various relationships that the book documented were intentionally not published on right-wing sites like Breitbart News. What GAI did instead was to reach out to investigative reporters in mainstream media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others, and try and encourage their reporters to take this research that they'd done and to go off and do some digging on their own. And they did, and that wound up resulting in front page stories in a lot of major newspapers that got this negative information about Clinton in front of a whole different audience than reads Breitbart News or listens to talk radio. And if you look at how Donald Trump chose to run against Clinton in the general election, Trump was essentially channeling the same attacks that Bannon had conceived and pushed in the Clinton cash book. And so ultimately, he succeeded in this years-long plan to plot and carry off the downfall of Hillary Clinton.
Joshua Green is senior national correspondent for Bloomberg Business Week. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment. This is Fresh Air.
Support for WABE comes from Pace Academy, creating prepared, confident citizens of the world through innovative global leadership programs. Open house is Saturday, November 19th and Sunday, November 20th. Information at paceacademy.org.
Economists say there's a retail sales shortage this holiday season. We'll find out what effect that could have on brick and mortar shopping malls. Plus, we continue our conversation exploring the new face of 21st century policing. We've heard from law enforcement, now what the community hopes to accomplish. I'm Rose Scott. And I'm Jim Burris. Closer Look starts at 1 here on 90.1 WABE.
This is Fresh Air, and we're speaking with Joshua Green. He is senior national correspondent for Bloomberg Business Week. We're talking about Steve Bannon, who has been named to a senior post by President-elect Donald Trump. There's a lot of consternation, criticism, alarm about the appointment of Bannon to a senior-level position in the Trump White House. The concern is that it suggests a tolerance, if not embrace, of racism and anti-Semitism. What about the idea that Breitbart News itself propagates, white supremacist views? I mean, the New York Times editorial on this said to scroll through Breitbart's headlines is to come upon a parallel universe where black people do nothing but commit crimes, immigrants rape native-born daughters, and feminists want to castrate men. Southern Poverty Law Center says he made Breitbart News a white ethno-nationalist propaganda mill. What's your sense of the content of Breitbart News?
Well, it is certainly inflammatory and fixated on race, on religion, on all the sorts of things that have upset people. I think the thing to understand about Breitbart, and this is not to excuse anything they write or publish, is that they are deliberately provocative. They're aiming to offend and upset people in order to stoke the grassroots anger at government and the broader culture. In internet language, it's an elaborate and effective trolling operation, because that is what marshals this group of disaffected Republicans, and other people, sometimes referred to as the alt-right, but essentially this splinter faction of conservatives who have attacked and now taken over the Republican Party over the last 4 or 5 years.
It's one thing if white supremacists read Breitbart News and if they write shocking comments in response to the stories, but as you look at the content, I mean, does the website seem to, embrace and propagate these views of white nationalism and white supremacism? What's your sense?
I think it certainly fuels those views. And, I had a discussion with Bannon about this back in 2015, about, I said, you're a former Harvard guy, you're a Goldman Sachs banker. I'm sort of shocked at some of the things you write because you come out of a culture that isn't, openly racist or anti-Semitic. And what he said essentially was that they are trying to reach an audience that doesn't have an outlet anywhere else in mainstream media. I pulled up some of the quotes. He said, we focus on things like immigration, ISIS, race riots, what he calls the persecution of Christians. He says, we give a perspective that other outlets are not going to give. There are not a lot of outlets that are covering that, at least not from the perspective that we should be running a victory lap every time some sort of traditional value gets undercut. The question I was always interested in getting at with Bannon was, do you really believe this stuff? Because a lot of it is offensive and inflammatory. And he said, personally, I'm mixed on a lot of this stuff, but we're airing a lot of things that traditional people are thinking that don't get mainstream media representation anymore. So they were making a market for these kinds of views and these kinds of stories and attracting an audience, what's turned out to be an extremely large and powerful audience, by tapping these sentiments.
I'm wondering what Bannon brought to the campaign. It seems like his real expertise is in messaging. Was he primarily a guy who brought that expertise?
I think messaging and theater, for lack of a better word. I mean, Bannon is a guy who came out of the media world. He used to be a movie producer. He made documentary movies. He's somebody, I think, with a pretty clear sense of narrative and also of the value of presentation and how you can seize the attention of the entire political culture if you push the buttons right. I think he's figured out that you can essentially seize control of the political conversation through stunts like the one that Bannon orchestrated before the second debate, where he rolled out all these women who had accused Bill Clinton of sexual assault and sexual harassment. And he's somebody, I think, who takes Trump's impulses and channels them into a more or less cogent worldview that fits into this right-wing populist ethos that Bannon is all about.
What's interesting about it is that if Bannon was good at pushing Trump in directions of appealing to this provocative populist message, it's in the closing days of the campaign when Trump was muted and on message and not making headlines that he really made progress in the polls. It's kind of an irony, isn't it?
No, I actually wouldn't agree with that. I think in the closing days of the campaign, if you listen to what Trump was saying, I mean, it was unhinged. I mean, this stuff about dark conspiracy theories and cabals of global bankers, it struck tones, I think, that were anti-Semitic. I would argue that Trump, in the final weeks of the campaign, was mainlining the purest distillation of Bannon's views out there on the stump, and that, to my shock and a lot of other people's, that actually resonated with a much larger segment of the electorate than we had anticipated.
He's an interesting character, and in your profile of him, the photos show him wearing cutoffs, and when you see him in photos now, like with the transition team, he really stands out from the Trump family, who are so carefully tailored and coiffed. I mean, Bannon, he looks a little unkempt. He might have a little growth of beard. He doesn't have a tie. His hair isn't exactly combed. I mean, if one were being unkind, you might say he looks like somebody ready to mix it up. You spent time with him. Is this a cultivated look, or is that just him?
That is just, I mean, if you want to be blunt, he looks like a bloated, homeless alcoholic and revels in that view. I mean, if you look at the cover picture he let us shoot for Business Week, he is sitting on a couch wearing like two polo shirts on top of each other with an Oxford shirt over that and cargo shorts and flip-flops. Clearly hasn't shaved or showered. He revels in this image of himself as an outsider who is giving a big middle finger to the system.
There are petitions circulating urging Trump to reverse the hiring of Steve Bannon. Why is he so loyal to Steve Bannon?
There's been so much kind of shock and consternation about how a guy like Bannon, who is so far outside the bounds of anybody who'd typically be considered for a West Wing position, gets elevated to one. I think it's important to remember what we've just witnessed and what Trump himself has just seen. that Bannon, and this is what originally attracted me to him as a profile subject, is a smart guy and a clever strategist who orchestrated this elaborate plan to deny Hillary Clinton the presidency that we've just watched work. It succeeded. And so I think that Trump has a degree of faith in Bannon that he doesn't have in other people. And I think that's why Trump has been willing to withstand all the intense criticism over the Bannon appointment that we've seen the last few days. To me, it's sort of like the least shocking aspect of what Trump has done in appointing Bannon to the West Wing. I mean, the guy hatched this elaborate plan to stop Clinton, and it worked.
The plan being to research her background as in the Senate and State Department and put out the book and feed it to the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, the plan being, this multi-year, multifaceted effort to take down Hillary Clinton, right? Part of it was Breitbart News with its rolling narratives about how Clinton was corrupt and doing Benghazi and this and that, and really stoking all this conservative right-wing anger against her and against any Republican that treated her as anything less than, a terrible pariah and a threat to the country. That eventually came to include people like Paul Ryan, who are the most mainstream of Republicans. And then on the other hand, you have the Government Accountability Institute and the Clinton Cash book that figured out a way to kind of hack into the mainstream media and propagate these negative anti-Clinton stories that had the effect of driving up her unfavorability rating. If you look at what happened in the election, essentially Clinton was too unpopular to reconstitute the Obama coalition that got him elected twice. She lost the presidential race narrowly. I mean, to my mind, Bannon is one of the major figures, if not the major figure, that conceived of and orchestrated and carried out that attack. That was what he laid out in the piece that I thought was so interesting. And to be honest, I never thought in a million years he would carry it off. But look, he has.
Joshua Green, thanks so much for speaking with us.
It was great being with you.
Joshua Green is senior correspondent for Bloomberg Business Week, where his profile of Steve Bannon was published. He spoke with Fresh Air's Dave Davies. After we take a short break, I'll talk with Casey Affleck, who stars in the new film Manchester by the Sea. He also starred in Gone Baby Gone, which was directed by his brother, Ben Affleck. I'm Terry Gross, and this is Fresh Air.
WHYY's Fresh Air and its commitment to sharing ideas and encouraging meaningful conversation. Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Audible, provider of audiobooks on topics ranging from astronomy to zombies. More information at audible.com/listen. Audible, stories that surround you. And from Whole Foods Market, offering the flavors of the season, from organic turkeys and broths to peak season produce and ready-to-eat options. Holiday recipes available at wfm.com/holiday.
Support for WABE comes from California Closets, committed to designing solutions for organizing any room in the home. Inspiration available at California Closets, Alpharetta, Buckhead, Lawrenceville, and online, californiaclosets.com.
From AtlantaPlanet.org, here's a look at some upcoming events. It's opening night for Christmas Canteen at Gwinnett's Aurora Theater. It's a musical revue with sketch comedy, and it's the show's 21st season. It's also opening night for Urban Nutcracker from Val Ethnic Dance Company, an Atlanta twist on the holiday favorite. If you want to know what's happening in and around Atlanta, visit us at AtlantaPlanet.org.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. My guest is Casey Affleck, a great actor who many people, including me, think